My name is Kara. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and everything I have I earned by myself. No inheritance, no secret trust fund, no one paying my bills for me. Just years of working, saving, and refusing to let anyone tell me what I could or could not do with my own life. I built my financial stability slowly through patience and quiet discipline, staying in modest apartments while I worked long hours choosing stability instead of attention. One afternoon, everything changed. My father was visiting to help me carry a few boxes into my home office. While I stepped into the kitchen to make coffee, he sat at my desk scrolling through my open financial documents without asking. When I returned, his face was frozen in disbelief as the numbers stared back at him. $1.5 million sitting in my investment accounts. He did not congratulate me. He did not ask how I managed to get there. He simply said that now our family could finally fix things for my sister, who had been struggling to secure a mortgage. He spoke as if my savings were already spoken for, as if my years of sacrifice were simply a resource for him to redistribute. When I told him no, his expression changed. Calm turned to disappointment. Disappointment turned to anger. That was the moment I realized something important. Respect begins with the word no. If you're watching up to this point, comment the city you're in. I'm always curious to see how far my story travels. Growing up, the differences in how my parents treated me and my older sister were not spoken aloud, but they were always present in the small decisions that shaped our lives. My sister Blair was the one who always had her needs considered first. When she mentioned wanting to attend dance classes, my parents rearranged schedules to drive her across town 3 times a week. When her school trip required several $100s, the payment appeared without hesitation. She never demanded these things. She simply existed in a space where her desires were expected to be met. I learned to adapt early. I was the child who packed her own lunch and learned how to mend loose buttons because asking for help often led to a reminder of how busy or tired everyone was. When it came time for college applications, Blair received guidance from tutors, school advisors my parents arranged, and weekend visits to campuses. When my turn arrived, I figured out financial aid forms alone, wrote scholarship essays at the public library after work shifts, and compared community colleges because the idea of anyone covering my tuition did not feel realistic. My father, Malcolm, never said I was less deserving. He simply believed Blair needed more support, often explaining that she was more sensitive, more fragile, or more likely to struggle if things did not go exactly right. My mother, Elise, rarely disagreed with him. She would sometimes look at me with what seemed like sympathy, but she rarely intervened. There was an unspoken understanding in our house regarding who required attention and who could survive without it. I became the one who survived. During high school, I worked part-time at a cafe using my earnings to pay for my phone bill, school supplies, and eventually gas for the used car I bought after saving for nearly 2 years. Meanwhile, Blair had a gently used SUV gifted to her the week she earned her driver's license. This was not because she demanded it. It was because everyone agreed she needed something safe and reliable. My needs were secondary because I was expected to adjust, endure, and figure things out quietly. These experiences did not make me resent Blair. She was kind in her own way and never acted entitled. She simply lived in the reality that had been created for her. She did not understand the weight of choosing between groceries and textbooks, or the pressure of wondering whether a surprise expense meant skipping meals. I learned resourcefulness and independence from necessity, not from inspiration. College forced me to become even more disciplined. I took on multiple jobs, studied in hallways between shifts, and spent breaks working extra hours instead of going home. There were days when exhaustion made everything feel overwhelming, but there was also a quiet pride in knowing each bill was paid because I made it possible. My financial stability was not an accident. It was built through sacrifice, planning, and a refusal to rely on anyone who had never offered help freely. Those years shaped my understanding of ownership. Money, time, and effort were things I protected because I knew their cost. Blair never learned these lessons not out of laziness but because she never had to. Our parents had unintentionally encouraged her dependence while pushing me toward independence so early that it became my identity. As I stood in my home office years later watching my father react to my financial success with expectation instead of pride, I felt the weight of every choice that led me here. His assumption that my savings belonged to the family made it clear he had never truly seen the effort behind them. To him, the resilience I developed meant I could always give more. In that moment, I made a silent promise. I would not allow the patterns of my childhood to repeat in my adult life. The sacrifices I made belonged to me. The stability I built was mine to protect. No one would decide the value of my work except me. That weekend, the family gathered in the living room. The late evening sun cast a warm, muted glow across the walls, but the atmosphere felt tight, as though the air itself knew something was about to fracture. My father sat in his familiar chair near the fireplace, shoulders squared and posture rigid. My mother sat slightly behind him, hands resting gently on her lap, her expression soft in appearance, yet unable to hide a layer of tension beneath. My sister Blair sat on the opposite side of the room with her phone in her hand, though she was not looking at it. My cousin Jocelyn sat near the arm of the sofa, watching quietly, not passive, but observant. Dad began without any attempt at softness. His voice was measured, carefully controlled. "We need to discuss how we support each other as a family," he said. The tone implied the conclusion had already been made, and the purpose of this gathering was simply to have me fall in line. I sat down across from him and met his gaze, steady and composed. "I have always supported this family," I said, "but the money I earned came from work I did myself. It is not shared property just because we are related." Blair shifted slightly, her discomfort visible in the way she tightened her grip on her phone. "I never asked for anything," she said. Her voice was quiet, uncertain, as though she wanted to distance herself from the negotiation happening in her name. She had not requested a house, but she also had not refused the idea of receiving one. Mom leaned in, her tone gentle, almost pleading in its softness. "We know you have worked hard," she said carefully, "but helping Blair would give her stability. You already have stability. And when one person in the family can help another, it makes the whole family stronger." Though the words were kind, the message was still the same. Because I had succeeded, my success was no longer mine. It was expected to become an asset for the group, something to be distributed. The quiet pressure in the room pressed against my chest. I chose my words carefully. Wanting someone to be secure does not make me responsible for providing it at the cost of my own boundaries. I will not sign away my financial autonomy. Dad's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his voice growing heavier. "Family does not abandon each other," he stated. "You have more than enough. Blair needs this." Blair's eyes, lowered cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and resentment. Being spoken about as someone who relied on others to succeed clearly struck something in her. Jocelyn was the first to break the silence. Her voice was steady, grounded, not emotional, but firm. "Supporting someone should be a choice," she said, "not a requirement. Kara worked for what she has. That cannot be erased because it is convenient. And Blair deserves dignity, not dependency forced in her name." The room held stillness for a long moment. Mom looked down as though unsure how to respond. Blair's expression was tense, her breathing uneven as she tried not to look at me. Dad did not look shaken. Instead, his expression settled into something firmer, more resolute. He stood slowly, signaling that his decision remained unchanged. "We will handle this my way," he said, each word absolute. The conversation was over. The divide was no longer suggested. It was drawn. 3 days later, I received a notification from my bank while I was at my desk reviewing project timelines for the upcoming quarter. The subject line caught my attention because it mentioned an account guarantor request. I opened the email carefully, expecting some kind of error, but the message was clear. The bank was informing me that someone had attempted to list me as a financial guarantor for a mortgage application. As I scanned the details, the name of the applicant appeared and my pulse tightened. It was my father. It was not my sister who had made the request. It was my father, and that truth settled heavily in my chest. I closed the laptop slowly and sat back, letting the realization settle. It was not simply about pushing me verbally in the living room or trying to persuade me through conversations wrapped in sentiment. This was an action taken behind my back, using my financial identity to move forward with a loan process. In the United States, being listed as a guarantor is not symbolic. It means legal responsibility. If the borrower fails to pay, the guarantor becomes liable. It affects credit score, tax reporting, long-term financial planning, and even mortgage eligibility of the guarantor themselves. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a decision made assuming I would either not find out or would not challenge it. I did not react immediately. Anger was there, undeniable, but reacting from that place would only create more chaos. I needed clarity. I contacted the bank directly, confirmed verbally that no authorization had ever been given, and requested documentation of the attempt. The employee assisting me on the call paused for a long moment and lowered her tone as if she recognized the situation without needing explanation. She explained the steps required to formally dispute the authorization and to secure my profile from being used in any future applications. I took notes carefully, ensuring I missed nothing. After hanging up, I called my cousin Jocelyn. When I explained what had happened, her silence held a weight that was not surprise, but recognition. "This is beyond emotional obligation," she said. "This is a boundary violation with legal consequences. You need to protect yourself properly. I know a financial advisor who deals with family-related financial disputes. I will set up a meeting for you. Do not confront anyone until you have your plan in place." Her pragmatism steadied me. It reminded me that clarity and structure were forms of power. Reacting impulsively would make it easier for others to dismiss my response as emotional rather than justified. I agreed, and she arranged the appointment for the following morning. That night, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was quiet, softer than it had been in recent conversations. She did not try to justify anything. She simply said, "Your father told me what he tried to do." I did not know he had taken it that far. There was guilt in her tone, but not resistance. She understood that a line had been crossed. However, understanding did not erase the action. "I am handling it," I told her, maintaining a calm tone that did not rise or break, a steadiness shaped by exhaustion rather than fury. "I know," she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen a line crossed but did not know how to walk it back. "I just hope this does not end everything between us." There was no answer to offer her that would be honest and soft at the same time, so I remained quiet. After the call, I prepared documentation, emails, and notes for the meeting with the advisor. As I organized each piece of evidence, something in me settled. This situation was not about family care or shared responsibility or emotional history. It had moved into the realm of autonomy and protection. Once something enters that realm, sentiment can no longer be the guiding force. This time, I would not be talked out of my boundaries. They would be enforced. A week after the conversation at the house, the situation began spreading far beyond our immediate family. It started with a few subtle comments circulating through group chats among our relatives, then shifted into phone calls, concerned messages, and questions disguised as sympathy. The version of the story reaching everyone did not resemble reality. Dad had framed the situation in a way that placed himself as a responsible parent, trying to keep the family together, while I was painted as someone who had suddenly forgotten where she came from. It was clear this retelling had a purpose. He was applying pressure not through direct confrontation now, but through the silent weight of extended family judgment. The first cousin who called asked if I was doing all right, her tone light yet cautious, as though speaking to someone on the verge of spiraling. Another relative sent a long message about how families survive when successful members share their blessings generously. I read each of these messages slowly. I recognized their meaning without needing it spelled out. They were not reaching out to understand. They were reaching out to persuade. Blair was caught in the middle of it, and the strain began to show in the way she moved and spoke. She had never asked for the house. That had always been part of Dad's narrative, not hers. She had tried to tell relatives that the situation was more complicated than what they had heard, but every attempt she made only seemed to confirm the idea that she was ungrateful for the supposed generosity being extended toward her. The role assigned to her was one of someone who needed to be helped, and she had no way to refuse it without seeming ungrateful. The pressure crushed her from both sides. One evening she came to my apartment. She did not pretend to be composed. The exhaustion was visible beneath her eyes and in the slight tremor in her voice. She said that she could not stay in the house any longer. She felt as though every interaction carried the expectation for her to take something from me. She felt as though she had become a symbol rather than a person. She said she wanted to leave to start somewhere she was not constantly being defined by what others believed she needed. She asked if I thought she was running away. I told her she was making a choice for herself, something we had both spent our lives trying to do. Mom's stance shifted during that period. Perhaps it was watching Blair unravel under the pressure, or perhaps the situation had moved beyond the point where she could pretend it was a misunderstanding. She called me more frequently, though her voice was careful, as if she were trying to hold together several truths at once. She never directly challenged Dad, but she no longer supported the narrative he was spreading. There were brief hesitations in her words that told me she was moving toward a line she had never crossed before. Meanwhile, the pressure continued to escalate among the relatives. Some expressed silent disapproval. Others spoke with urgency, insisting I reconsider. The tone was always wrapped in the language of family loyalty, but the message remained the same. I was expected to give. I was expected to yield. I was expected to surrender what I had earned in order to maintain the illusion of harmony. The tension reached a peak when Dad called a small family gathering limited to only a few relatives who had voiced concern. He believed that speaking as a group would make the message more persuasive. I listened without interrupting, allowing each person to say what they came to say. When they finished, I spoke calmly. I made it clear that my boundaries were not cruelty, but a form of self-respect. The room did not erupt. It simply fell silent. The silence signaled that the balance of control had begun to shift. One afternoon, I drove back to the house where I had grown up. The air around that place always carried the familiar shape of our family history, but now it held something heavier, something unresolved. I walked through the front door without hesitation. I did not come to negotiate. I came to speak clearly. Dad was in the living room sorting through a stack of property brochures. It was not a surprise. He looked up with the kind of guarded expression someone uses when they believe they are prepared, though the preparation is built on assumptions rather than understanding. Mom sat nearby, her posture rigid as though she were bracing herself for a shift she could feel was coming. I stepped into the room and rested my hands on the back of a chair. I kept my breathing steady. I had spent years learning how to keep myself upright without needing approval from anyone in that house. That practice guided me now. I told Dad that I was aware of everything regarding the attempted financial arrangements. I described the bank notification, the attempted cosign request, and the inquiries that followed. I made sure every word was calm because calmness carried more force here than volume ever could. He opened his mouth to speak, but I continued before he could redirect the narrative. I stated that my finances were not a community asset. I stated that autonomy was not abandonment. I stated that any attempt to use my name, my credit, or my savings for a house that was not mine would mean that I would remove myself from the relationship entirely. My tone remained steady, not threatening, not emotional, simply factual. The truth did not require intensity to be real. Blair walked into the living room just then carrying a small duffel bag. She paused when she saw us. Her eyes did not hold fear or apology this time. They held certainty. She said she would not be taking the house. She said she would not let her life be shaped into a symbol of sacrifice or obligation. Her voice did not shake. For the first time in a long time, she was speaking for herself, rather than trying to soften the weight of others. Dad stared at her as if he had never seen her clearly. The stillness in his expression revealed something unsettling. He had built this plan believing that everyone would fall into place the way they always had. Hearing her refuse was not just unexpected. It dismantled the foundation he had been standing on. Mom rose from her seat. Her breaths came slowly, yet her voice was firm when she spoke. She said she would not support any further attempts to use my resources. She said she had watched the consequences unfold, not just for me, but for Blair as well. She said that the cost of forcing family unity through control was too high. Her words were not dramatic, yet they carried the weight of a threshold being crossed. Dad looked from one of us to the other, searching for some familiar route back to authority. None existed anymore. There were no raised voices, no accusations, no emotional storms. The quiet itself communicated the change. The dynamic that had shaped our family for decades had shifted. The expectations that had once bound us had dissolved. I told him that I cared about the family, but care could not exist where respect was absent. I said that if there was ever a future where we could rebuild a relationship, it would have to begin with acknowledging boundaries rather than overriding them. I did not ask if he understood because understanding could not be forced. When I left the house, the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the driveway. Blair walked with me. Mom remained inside. Dad stayed standing among his brochures, surrounded by plans that no longer had a place to land. The quiet of that house was different now. It held the shape of consequence. The door closed behind us, and the era of unquestioned obedience ended there. 3 months later, life felt different in ways that were quiet yet unmistakable. The distance that had formed within our family did not arrive suddenly. It settled gradually, as though everyone had been forced to examine themselves in the silence that followed our confrontation. There was no dramatic collapse. Instead, each of us adjusted to a new understanding of how we would relate to one another, or if we still could. Dad's presence in the extended family began to shift first. He had built an image of himself as someone who guided, protected, and organized everything. The story that spread among relatives was not a single version, but a mix of what he had told them and what others had slowly discovered. Attempts to paint himself as a misunderstood provider did not land the way he expected. People noticed the gaps between his explanations and the reality that had unfolded. Conversations about him became cautious. Invitations grew sparse. His authority was no longer assumed. The loss of influence was gradual, but it was undeniable. Mom rented a small townhouse across town. It was not anything extravagant, yet it carried an atmosphere of space that she had not allowed herself for years. She spent mornings walking through a nearby park and evenings reading at the kitchen table without tension hovering in the air. Our conversations during that period became gentler. She began to apologize in ways that were not grand or dramatic, but grounded in reflection. She spoke of how easy it had been to follow long-standing patterns without questioning who benefited or who was harmed by them. She did not ask to erase the past. She simply tried to show that she had begun to learn something from it. Blair changed in her own way as well. She moved into a small apartment with her own lease and her own decisions. She worked longer hours, learned to budget, and allowed herself to feel pride in what she built slowly instead of what she received instantly. Our relationship became more balanced. Conversations between us were no longer shaped by guilt, resentment, or unspoken expectations. We began to talk about ordinary things again, like meals, hobbies, and the small rhythms of daily life. She did not owe me gratitude for my boundaries, and I did not owe her protection from them. That clarity helped us find one another again. As for me, nothing about my work changed, yet everything about the way I lived inside my life did. I no longer moved cautiously, waiting for someone to question the validity of my independence. I no longer felt the weight of needing to justify the hours, sacrifices, and decisions that had led me to financial security. The boundary I had drawn became a part of me, rather than a line I was constantly defending. I continued building my life with steadiness rather than fear. Peace became something I protected deliberately. There were moments when grief surfaced. The loss was not only about the conflict, it was about realizing how long I had carried a version of family that required me to shrink myself to maintain it. Letting go of that version felt like stepping into open air after years of crouching. It was unfamiliar, but it was freeing. We were not the same family we had been before. Some connections loosened, others strengthened. Some remained uncertain. Yet there was a kind of honesty in the distance, and honesty even when uncomfortable allowed room for growth. The future was not set, but for the first time that uncertainty did not frighten me. Today, as I tell this story, I recognize how much has changed inside me. The events that unfolded forced me to define what I was willing to carry and what I could finally place down. I once believed that fulfilling the expectations of my family was a quiet duty that did not need to be questioned. I believed that love meant stepping in, smoothing over filling gaps, and remaining dependable regardless of the emotional price. Those beliefs had been shaped over years of repetition, gentle suggestions, and moments where speaking up felt more dangerous than staying silent. Yet silence has a cost. It does not disappear when we choose to swallow it. It settles, it gathers, it hardens. Eventually, it demands something back. Setting boundaries did not shatter my family. It revealed the shape of what had already been broken. My role within that structure had been to stabilize everything to prevent it from collapsing. When I stopped doing that, everyone had to face what existed without my constant reinforcement. Some relationships weakened, others strengthened. All of them became more honest. I learned that the weight I had carried was not proof of love. It was proof of fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being seen as selfish for choosing my own well-being. Family is not a contract of endless sacrifice. It is not an obligation to give simply because someone feels entitled to receive. Care without respect is not care. Support without acknowledgement becomes exploitation. The moment I understood that something settled quietly inside me, I did not need to apologize for protecting my stability. I did not need to justify the life I had built. I only needed to continue living it with clarity and steadiness. The lesson is that boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the structure that allows love to grow without resentment. When we refuse to diminish ourselves to ease the discomfort of others, we are not abandoning them. We are returning to ourselves. It can feel frightening to step away from familiar patterns, yet peace does not come from being needed. It comes from choosing ourselves without guilt and trusting that those who truly value us will adjust rather than break. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonates with your own experiences, I invite you to reflect on where you may be carrying more than you should. You deserve a life that feels steady, dignified, and grounded in your own choices. If you feel comfortable, share your thoughts or your journey in the comments. Someone else may need the courage you have found today.